Welcome to my channel. She walked into the wrong room, and the Air Force nearly forgot who she really was. Elena Vasquez, the quiet maintenance tech, once flew missions so deep they were erased from history. Now, she works in silence, until a single name, Warden Six, brings a room full of elite pilots to a halt. You ever walk into a room and instantly know you weren't supposed to be there? That's what happened when I stepped through the wrong door at Clearwater Flight Command. The place snapped quiet like someone cut the power, and a lieutenant with perfect teeth and a too-tight uniform spun on his heel, barked, "No techs in the briefing zone." I paused halfway over the threshold, boots still streaked in hangar dust, grease on my sleeves, clipboard in hand. My name tag read Elena Vasquez, age 34, Base Maintenance Division. No rank beyond technician, and certainly no clearance for ops planning. "You're here to fix landing gear, not read flight paths," he said, like it was supposed to sting. I nodded once. "Copy that," and backed out without another word. But then, out of nowhere, a voice, low and weathered, rose from the back of the room. "Hold on." I turned. Slowly. The man who stood up looked like someone carved from old storm clouds. Colonel Tom Brecker. "Retired now," they said. "But you don't lose the war from a man's eyes just because he's collecting pension." He stared at me like I was a ghost come to collect a debt. "Is that you?" he asked. Wait, are you Warden Six?" The room froze. I didn't answer. Didn't need to. He already knew. Behind me, the control tower's glass hummed under the midday heat, a pair of C-130s revving up out on the field. Out in the hall, someone was arguing over spare parts for a ground radar dish. But here in this room, you could hear hearts beating. "She's Elena Vasquez," the young officer muttered, suddenly unsure. "Maintenance. From, Bay 2B. Brecker's tone went soft. "That's not just Vasquez. That's the pilot who flew silent over Hadram Fault in 13. Took out a radar nest with no backup, no radio. She's the one they called Warden Six." The officers looked at each other like the name was some old myth they didn't quite believe. I stood still, back straight, saying nothing. Because some stories ain't mine to tell. Not anymore. They only know what the records say, and the records don't say much. Not about the ops where we had no insignias on our wings. Not about the nights where the sky had teeth and silence was our only weapon. I traded in that call sign years ago. Hung it up with my flight suit after one op too many went sideways. Since then, I've been a wrench monkey in a beat-up hangar. The one who swaps out comm relays and recalibrates sensor arrays. The one you forget to salute if you bother looking up at all. But I see things. I see when someone's stabilizers twitch off angle on rollout. I hear when their throttle's a breath behind sync on startup. I adjust, I tune, I patch things no one asked me to fix, because I know if I don't, someone might not come back. Nobody thanks me. That's fine. I don't do it for medals. I do it because once, I didn't fix something in time. Once was all it took. And it cost us 5 good people. They tell the story different now, of course. Friendly fire. Botched intelligence. Weather anomaly. Whatever sells in a debrief. But I was there. I flew in ahead, marked the blind zones. The evac route was my plan. And when it all went to hell, when missiles painted the sky and the screaming filled my headset, I couldn't save them. My jet made it home. Theirs didn't. Since then, I've stayed on the ground. They call me the quiet tech. Like it's a joke. Like I'm just some half-spooked woman who won't let go of the past. They don't know that every day, I walk past the nose cone of a salvaged Falcon 9A, etched with a nameplate that's been sanded down. Inside my toolbox, buried under the torque wrenches and sensor calibrators, is a single glove. Flight-worn. Left-handed. Thumb stitched with call sign initials, W6V. Not a symbol. Oh wait. It reminds me why I keep showing up. That morning, when I tried to warn ops about the radar sync issue, an alignment error between the new EW system and legacy ground mapping, I knew it wouldn't go well. I wasn't on the manifest. Not a lieutenant. Not a planner. Just the woman who noticed the shift on the signal sweep. But I reported it anyway. Didn't even get halfway through the sentence before a captain waved me off. "Go calibrate something," he said. "This is above your clearance." He was right. But he was wrong, too. And when Colonel Brecker stood up and said my name, my real one, the room didn't just freeze. It listened. "September 18th, 2013, Brecker said, looking straight at me. "East of the Tormund Gap. Operation Light Veil. Nobody else said a word. Most of them hadn't even been in the service back then. I nodded once. Warden Six took out a fortified relay grid with 3 drones on her 6, he said, turning to the room. In and out in under 4 minutes. No radar trace, no comms, and not a scratch on her bird. You know why? He didn't wait for an answer. Because she knew how to fly through digital darkness. The captain who'd waved me off earlier shifted in his seat. But sir, if that's true, why is she on a maintenance detail? Brecker didn't answer. Neither did I. But the real answer? The one no one wants to write down? Because after Light Veil came the Ghost Run disaster. 6 jets in, only 1 came back. Mine. You can call it a survivor's mistake or a veteran's guilt. Doesn't matter. I know what it cost. So now I calibrate. I adjust. I reroute. I catch the things they miss before they ever know to look. Because sometimes, the best way to fly is to keep others in the sky and never lift off yourself. Colonel Brecker didn't need to speak for the room to feel what was happening. That's the thing about combat veterans. The real ones. When they talk, people listen. And when they stop talking, that's when folks really lean in. The captain who dismissed me, Evans, I think his name was, tried to regain control. Sir, with all due respect, even if she flew those missions, we can't verify that. There's no record of Warden Squadron anywhere in Joint Ops archives. Brecker gave him a slow, knowing smile. You think missions like that leave records? He opened a battered folder. Black cover. Red stripe. Most in the room had never seen one like it. Not unless you'd spent time in a SCIF or buried 3 layers deep in joint tasking. He pulled out a photograph. Faded, slightly curled, grainy with age. 6 pilots. Desert gear. A row of matte black fighters behind us, half obscured by dust. He pointed to the smallest figure in the photo. That's Warden Six. Right there. You could hear the shift in the room's breathing. Someone in the back whispered, "No way." But it was me. Younger then. Thinner. Laughing, even. A person I hadn't seen in the mirror in a decade. Evans leaned forward. That's you. I nodded once. And then, just like that, it wasn't silence anymore. It was tension. Controlled. Heavy. Evans swallowed. So why'd you leave it behind? That was the question. Always the question. I let my eyes find a spot on the opposite wall, just above the mission board where they'd been mapping out Operation Crossveil. That's what they were prepping for. Nighttime intercept. Multi-squad sim targets. One of the most advanced training exercises Clearwater had hosted in years. If they'd flown it the way it was drawn, half the squad would have flown blind into jamming fields. That radar misalignment I flagged wasn't just technical, it was tactical. I left, I said, quiet but clear, because on our 18th op, I didn't catch a signal offset in time. 5 pilots followed me into a blind zone thinking I'd cleared it. They didn't come back. A thick pause stretched out between the words and the silence. Long enough that you could hear the faint whine of a GPU spinning up outside the bay doors. Brecker's voice softened. It wasn't your fault. But it was my responsibility, I replied. Then I turned to face the room full on. And ever since then, I've made it mine to ensure no one flies blind on my watch. Doesn't matter if it's a sim op, a low-level recon hop, or a test pattern alignment. If it leaves this hangar, it leaves right. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't have to. It landed just the same. Lieutenant Mara Chun, one of the younger pilots, lifted her hand slowly. Ma'am, earlier this morning you recalibrated my PTOS system, didn't you? I nodded. You were pulling inaccurate airflow at low altitude. Could have tripped a stall warning at the wrong time. Her face went pale. I didn't even file that in maintenance. You didn't need to. I saw it on the readout when you came in. Another pilot piped up. Wait, that was you who fixed the flare launcher misfire on Hawk 14 last week. Flare signal was ghosting. Cleaned the ODB buffer loop. More murmurs. Suddenly, the woman in grease-stained coveralls wasn't just the tech. I was the one who'd been quietly keeping them alive. You've all been flying safer because of her, Brecker said, voice low and even. You just didn't know it. Captain Evans looked down, then back up at me. Why didn't you say anything? Because saying things hadn't helped before. Because every time I tried to warn someone, I'd been told to get back to the tools. Because I'd learned that it was easier to fix things quietly than to fight for the right to be heard. Until now. Now, I'd spoken up. And someone had listened. The room changed after that. They didn't say much. Not right away. Just nodded, shuffled papers, cleared throats. It wasn't shame exactly. It was realization. Like realizing the floor under you had been steel the whole time. You just never thought to check what was holding you up. I turned to Brecker. That radar mapping. If it's not aligned before Crossveil launches, your pilots are going to lose lock 5 seconds after takeoff. He gave a single nod. Then show us how to fix it. I walked to the console. No longer a ghost. No longer the tech no one looked at. Just me. Elena Vasquez. Warden 6. Not back in the sky, but back where I was needed. They gave me the console like it was a bomb that needed defusing. Funny thing was, that radar sync issue wasn't even complex. It was lazy. A mispatch between legacy firmware and the new jamming suite. The kind of bug a flight ops tech would only notice if they understood not just how radar works, but how pilots think when they're being hunted in the dark. I keyed into the ops terminal, brought up the EW overlay, and ran the sync map by hand. Old school. The kind of method no one teaches anymore because machines are supposed to handle it. But machines don't carry guilt. Machines don't remember what happens when they fail. This variable, I said, tapping a blinking line in the script, was written for Skyblade 2 systems. But your drones are running Echo 6 architecture. The drift you're seeing? It's not operator error. It's the code trying to sync across 2 generations of mismatched echo delay. No one said a word, but I could feel them behind me. Watching. Lieutenant Chen leaned in. So that's why we've been dropping target lock in low range. I nodded. That, and someone's running terrain masking simulations using a deprecated uplink channel. A bit of rain, and it'd crash mid-sortie. Captain Evans stepped up next to her, clearly out of his depth, but trying to catch up. So how do we fix it? You stop using autosync, I said. You run the sweep manual. You recalibrate your masking around natural signal decay instead of digital predictions. And you train your pilots to think like they've got nothing feeding them data but instincts. Brecker chuckled under his breath. Just like Warden used to. Someone behind me murmured, "She is Warden." I said nothing. The thing about legends is, they're always more comfortable as whispers. The moment they walk into a room with dirt on their boots and a coffee stain on their collar, people don't know what to do with them. Afterward, I went back to Bay 2B. Didn't wait for thanks. Didn't expect a memo. Just sat on the fender of an idle drone rig and pulled off my gloves. The hangar door was open just enough for the wind to whistle through. Smelled like jet fuel, ozone, and scorched concrete. My favorite kind of afternoon. That's when I noticed the silence. Usually, the junior techs would be bantering, complaining, throwing socket wrenches into tool bins too loud. But not today. They were watching me. Not with fear. With attention. "Ma'am," Chin said as she stepped in, still in flight gear, visor tucked under one arm. "Can I ask you something?" I gave a small nod. She looked nervous, real nervous, like she was approaching a loaded aircraft. "They said you flew through jamming fields without flares. That you didn't just evade radar. You predicted it." I tilted my head. "What's your question?" "Is it true?" she asked. "Did you fly blind?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into the inner pocket of my coveralls and pulled out a small strip of faded metal. A shard of fuselage, scorched, etched with 3 letters and a number barely legible, W6-17B. I handed it to her. She ran her fingers along the rough edge like it was sacred. "I flew aware," I said finally. "Not blind." She looked up, confused. "What's the difference?" When you fly blind, you hope the systems will carry you. When you fly aware, you understand what those systems miss. And you train yourself to fill the gap. "Is that what you did? Back then?" "No," I said. "It's what I do now." Behind her, a few other pilots had wandered in. Casual. No orders. No pretense. Just curiosity. A ripple had started. And like all ripples, it was headed somewhere bigger. That night, something shifted at Clearwater. It wasn't big or flashy. No announcements. No medals. Just a subtle quiet across the hangars, like even the building was holding its breath. It started with Chun. She came back after hours. Said she wanted to shadow while I ran a systems check on Raven 3. That was fine. I'd worked faster alone for years, but something about the way she watched, not gawking, not asking dumb questions, just listening, reminded me of my old wingmate, Harland. The way he'd memorize every twitch in my hands when I flew through radar fields, saying nothing but learning everything. After Chun, a few others trickled in. Lieutenant Quan, that hotshot named Travis, who always talked like he was auditioning for a war movie. Even Captain Evans, quiet now, less smug, said he just wanted to know what signs I looked for when a bird starts to lose sync. They weren't here for lectures. They were here for survival. And for the first time in years, I opened my mouth and taught. Not like an instructor. Not with handouts or PowerPoint. Just me, leaning over wiring panels, pointing at gyros, talking through how systems really behave under pressure. When air is thin, adrenaline's pumping, and everything digital decides to take a nap. You can't trust HUDs past 50 clicks in a jamming net, I told Chin. You have to know your own drift by feel. Count in your head. Listen for how the engine talks back. Talks back? She asked. Everything speaks, I said. Every piece of the jet. You just got to know how to hear it. She nodded like I'd handed her the answer to a question she hadn't known how to ask. Word started spreading. Pilots came down on their own time. Not for calibrations, though they'd always offer their birds as excuses, but for questions. The kind you don't ask in a briefing room because you're afraid someone might laugh. Ma'am, what do you do when GPS pings start repeating in patterns? How can you tell the difference between altitude loss and sensor ghosting? What's your protocol when the warning lights go dark but your gut's screaming red? I answered every single one. I didn't talk tactics. I talked survival. I didn't give commands. I gave memory. Stories. Lessons. The ones nobody puts in manuals because they didn't end with medals. They ended with people walking away alive. And that's when I knew something was waking up. Not just in them. In me. I'd buried that part. The part that used to brief mission leaders, fly solo into blind zones, map radar by feel, and make it out while no one else dared try. That wasn't just instinct. That was craft. And I'd kept it locked behind grief and guilt for too long. Then, one day, I walked into the hangar and found something on my bench. It wasn't official. No brass plaque. No ceremony. Just a small black rectangle. Laser cut. Bolted in place. It read, Warden 6, she kept the sky honest. Underneath, etched in smaller letters, vector blind. Drop silent. Reset beacon. That was my old op code. The one we used when we knew comms would fail. When we knew it was just us and the clouds, and the hope that someone was listening on the other side. I ran my fingers across the words and let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. They didn't know the full story. Not all of it. They didn't need to. But they knew enough now. They knew I wasn't just the woman in the coveralls. They knew I'd seen the edge and lived to pass back the map. It wasn't until a few weeks later that someone finally asked about the mission. Not directly, of course. Not at first. That's not how soldiers ask about ghosts. Chin was checking her headset comms while I ran diagnostics on her NAV relay. She glanced up and said, casually, Hey, Colonel Brecker mentioned Ghost Run once. You ever hear of it? I froze. Just for a second. But that second held 1,000 memories. She must have noticed because she stopped fiddling with her gear. Sorry. I didn't mean to pry. No. I said, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. It's all right. I set the tool down. Wiped my hands on a rag I kept folded in my back pocket. Then I walked over to the long workbench near the side wall and pulled open the third drawer. Inside was a thick folder, taped shut, worn thin at the edges. On the cover, handwritten, September 13th, 2013. I pulled out a satellite map, held it up to the light. Dust caught in the air like tiny parachutes. My fingers traced a line along a jagged mountain corridor. This was our extraction point. It was supposed to be cold. No hostiles. Intel said the radar grid had been neutralized. I turned to her. It wasn't. Chin said nothing. Just waited. I let the memory play out behind my eyes before I kept going. We'd just recovered a data node from a covert site. Critical encryption keys. Enemy had cracked IFF signatures and were planning to fly suicide missions using our own transponders. If they'd pulled that off, it would have sparked a full-on false flag war. We had to stop it. I looked back at the map. My thumb rested on a red-marked sector. I went in first. Ghost mode. No beacon. No wingman. Picked up the payload, erased the server. Got to evac coordinates. I closed the folder gently. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. She swallowed. An ambush. I nodded. Full wing. 5 enemy interceptors. More waiting on the ridge. Somehow, someone had leaked the evac location. I was ready to punch out or go down fighting. But then, I heard them. Your squad. Yeah. Phantom Squadron came in to pull me out. I paused, looked down at my hands. They never should have come. I didn't have comms. My signal was dark for a reason. But they came anyway. Believed in me more than the mission plan. Chen's voice was quiet now. You tried to warn them, didn't you? I nodded again. Broke silence. Screamed through the static. But it was too late. 3 jets got hit before they even saw the trap. The rest tried to break off, but we were boxed in. I took down 2 of theirs, tried to draw fire. But I stopped. No need to say it. She knew. Of 6 who flew in to save me, 5 didn't make it home. 2 more ejected and were captured. One of them died in captivity. I was the only one to fly back under my own power. And when I landed, they debriefed me, buried the mission, scrubbed my name from the logs, classified it into silence. That's when Warden 6 died. Chen's eyes were glassy, but steady. They made it back because of you. No, I said. They died because of me. They trusted my intel, my extraction point, my silence. They trusted your leadership, she replied. That's different. Maybe it was. I still didn't know. But I did know this. That was the last time I flew operational. Since then, every adjustment I've made to a cockpit system, every recalibrated sensor, every realigned altimeter, it's been for them. To keep their deaths from being repeated. To make sure the next mission doesn't end with wreckage on a mountain pass and a file sealed in shadows. Chen didn't ask anything else that night. Just placed the map back in its folder and stood with me for a long minute, both of us quiet. Before she left, she turned and said, I think you're still flying the mission, just from a different post. She walked out into the night air, and I stood there alone, with ghosts in my hands and jet fuel in my lungs, thinking maybe she was right. It didn't take long before the late-night visits became routine. The hangar lights stayed on later, not by order, just because no one wanted to leave. Chen would bring coffee. Quan showed up with old sim readouts, asking how I'd have handled them. Even Travis, the guy who once bragged he didn't need instructors, asked if I could eyeball his roll rate just once. I didn't teach. Not formally. I didn't stand at a board or give speeches. I showed. This twitch here? I pointed at a replay of a flight path. That's not turbulence. That's your rudder slipping half a second late. Happens when your foot hovers instead of commits. They started flying differently after that. Sharper, quieter, more in tune with their machines. They weren't just pilots anymore. They were readers of the air. And the weirdest part? They started trusting each other more, too. Like somehow, learning how to feel a jet's mood made them better wingmen. It didn't take long for the shift to reach the brass. Colonel Brecker kept quiet, as always. Watched. Let things grow naturally. But others? Not so subtle. Captain Laird from Tactical Review came by one afternoon. Clipboard in hand, stiff as a frozen wing flap. I'm seeing unusual cross-training patterns, he said, eyeing the growing group in my bay. Pilots spending time in maintenance. Non-standard mentorship. Untracked instruction. I didn't blink. You seeing problems with performance? He scowled. Because there weren't any. Flight readiness was up. Mishaps were down. Pilots were self-correcting before instructors even flagged errors. And more than that, there was calm in the squad now. Less posturing. Less panic. They're learning how to survive, I said. Not just how to fly. Laird didn't have a line for that. Just scribbled something on his sheet and left. After he was gone, Brecker wandered in and leaned against a bulkhead. He's rattled, he said. They can't quantify what you're doing. Good, I muttered. Maybe they'll stop trying to replace instinct with algorithms. Brecker smiled faintly. They won't, but they will start asking better questions. It was just past midnight when the door creaked open again. I expected Chun, maybe Quan, but it wasn't either of them. It was Colonel Ainsley, Ops Commander, the one who once told me, word for word, texts don't belong in strategy. She didn't speak right away, just looked around the bay, quiet, like she'd stepped into a place she wasn't sure she understood anymore. Then she held up a data slate. Lieutenant Hayes requested I forward this to you. Said you'd know what it means. I took it. Scrolled through. Sim data. Complex EW field. For aircraft. 3 failed to run. 1 cut through clean, with 0 digital support. I raised an eyebrow. Ainsley crossed her arms. He said you taught him that. Didn't teach, I said. Just reminded him to think. She didn't argue. Just looked me in the eye. You ever think about coming back? She asked. Flying. She nodded. I looked past her, out at the row of jets on the tarmac. Lights blinking soft in the dark. I am back, I said. Just not in the cockpit. She watched me a moment longer, then gave a short nod, and turned to leave. Before she stepped out, she said, "Whatever you're doing, it's working. Don't stop." I didn't plan to. Ghosts don't ask for permission. They just keep you alive. 6 months later, I heard the first rumor. Another base, 3 states over, ran a night sortie through an active jamming corridor. Pulled it off clean. The sim footage showed a flight path that bent through radar shadow, just like mine used to. A familiar signature. No name attached. No credit claimed. But I knew. That wasn't coincidence. That was teaching passed down. Chen had transferred 3 weeks earlier. Promoted, reassigned, and gone in a blink. She left a small note tucked inside my tool drawer. "The sky listens better when you speak its language. You taught me that." I kept it. Pilots from other squadrons started drifting through Clearwater on training rotation. But they weren't interested in base housing or briefings. They came to my bay, sat with me, listened, watched, asked questions with real weight behind them. "Ma'am, how do I know when I'm the weak link in formation? What do I trust when nothing's responding? Where do you look when the sky goes quiet?" And I answered, "Everyone," because I'd flown through that silence, because I'd come out the other side, and because every time one of them walked away sharper, steadier, more aware, I knew Warden Squadron hadn't died. It had just changed shape. There's no statue of me at Clearwater. No banner. No call sign etched in the control tower wall. That's fine. What matters isn't carved in stone. It's carried in the hands that double-check every hydraulic line, in the heads that memorize radar rhythms instead of trusting the console, in the eyes of pilots who now see more than just their screens. A few months back, someone hung a plaque by the side entrance to Bay 2B. Small. No fanfare. It read, "She didn't fly for glory. She flew so the rest of us could come home." Vector blind. Drop silent. Reset beacon. I never asked who put it there. Didn't need to. Because every time a rookie steps into that bay and sees it, something clicks. A bit of the myth becomes real. They realize that the quiet woman in coveralls might just hold the sharpest edge of all. Lieutenant Hayes made it into elite recon. Quan now teaches terrain following flight. Chen's become one of the Air Force's most sought-after instructors in radar evasion. And all of them still pass it on. The lessons, the instincts, the thinking. Not with my name attached. Just with truth. That's the real mission now. The one I never stopped flying. Because when your hands still keep others alive, when your knowledge keeps jets aloft and pilots whole, when your silence prevents funerals, you're not retired. You're deployed in a different way. I may never strap into a cockpit again. I may never hear Warden 6 over comms. But I know what I built. I know who carries it. The mission didn't end in 2013. It just took on a quieter form. And that's the thing about ghosts like me. We don't fade. We echo.